Sympathy, 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 sympathy.
Hey, hello everybody. All right. Hello, and welcome. My name is Ramin Yazdanpana, and I have the honor and pleasure to lead us in our webinar today. So, my hometown is Tallahassee, Florida, but I'm actually joining us today from Istanbul, Turkey. So for extra credit, if you can type in the chat how to say hello in Turkish, go ahead and do that if you know. Ah, Tammy, well done. Merhaba. Good. Yes, always good to know a little bit of different languages of the world and of course of our students. And if you can also take a moment and type in the chat where you're joining us from, whether that be a city in Florida or elsewhere. So again, just welcome to Webinar Wednesday. I want to thank you for being present today, either by joining us live right now or viewing this video of this webinar later on the IPDA website. I also want to support and your decision on creating the time and space in your day, in your precious life, for your own professional development, right? So our knowledge, skills, and abilities are some of our most valuable assets in life. So, investing in ourselves really is the best thing that we can do, and it always pays off. All right, just looking here at the chat, we see here for Pierce, Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. I was just there for a friend's wedding. Nassau County, Milton, Florida, Holmes County, Tampa, Pensacola, Palm Springs. Wonderful. We got Florida covered. All right, we got Florida covered, so that's great. Um, okay, so just before we jump in fully into our webinar, just a couple of things and points to remember and just to know on how to interact today. So we will be using the Q&A option mostly at the end of the webinar. So I'm trying to make space and time for that. But feel free to add any questions, ask any questions in the chat as they come up. And definitely please use the chat option for, as you're doing right now, and as you obviously know how to do, um, to interact today. Okay, I'll be asking you questions, so I know full well that you might be multitasking. That's fine, but I do appreciate your interaction when I ask for it. Feel free to use exclamation point, emojis, smiley faces, whatever to kind of express your tone and emotion. You're only in listen mode, so the more that you can engage in the chat, the better. So with that, I always like to thank the positive and brilliant IPDA team, June, Tammy, and Joseph for their support, and they always provide a lot of support to all of the moderators. They make everything possible that we're doing here today, and of course they provide the PDF version of this presentation today on the IPDA website, and it should be available within 48 hours for the video recording should be available within 48 hours for viewing and sharing. Okay, so with that, I'm gonna pause my video here just so I can focus on the presentation. But I'll be back. I'll be back for the Q&A. Okay, my video will be back. I'll be here the whole time. All right, so let me just pause the video. Okay, so our objectives for the day are to identify areas of differentiation in your adult ESOL classrooms, to consider the benefits of multi-level students in the adult ESOL classroom, to identify methods of differentiation, and to apply methods of differentiated instruction. So we're going to try to narrow it down today to applying some methods, a few of the methods, there are many, but applying it specifically to a resource that I really enjoy using in my adult ESOL classes. And if you don't know it, I think it'll be something that you will appreciate as well. So let's get going. Okay, so let's start by reflecting on our own interests and goals, on our own personal interests and goals. So this will help to get to know each other a little bit more, as well as apply a reflective practice to our teaching. So in the chat, please respond to the following one at a time. So first, what are some of your personal interests? These can be hobbies, passions, anything that really piques your curiosity and motivates you. So the first thing that comes to mind, what are some of your personal interests, if you can put that in the chat? I will say that just to start us off, some of my personal interests, you heard it a little bit at the beginning of the webinar, and that's playing music. That was my band that you listened to, the Maharaja Flamenco Trio. I play percussion, I play didgeridoo, so music and utilizing music as a way to educate audiences on culture, language, migration. Those are some of my personal interests. So we have here traveling, gardening, grandchildren, pets. I have my pet dog Ozzy that I love more than anything. Um, Finances, hiking, traveling, great, beautiful, amazing. Plants, who doesn't love plants? I love plants. Reading, playing instruments. I see you, Cynthia. All right, great. So we have so many interests, and just right from here, it just automatically just sparks greater curiosity, right? I want to know more about you. I'm sure that you want to know more about each other. So those are some of our personal interests and how they're so important in just kind of breaking the ice and starting to form a community, right? A community of this, in this case, of teaching practice, but in our classrooms, it's also forming a community of learning. So, with that, what are some of your goals? Okay, so this can be a short term goal, it can be a long term goal, doesn't really matter. What are some of your goals? So, let me think of what are some of my goals. I'd say one of my goals is to learn how to sail. So, I'm into sail. I want to be into sailing. So, okay, we have here return to college. That's a beautiful, beautiful goal. A lifelong learner is what I consider myself as well. So thank you for that, Cynthia. Learning French. Très bon, très bon. Obviously, I don't know French, but um, finally finishing all of my degrees. I get that. I get that, Christine. Travel to Europe. Beautiful. I'm here in Istanbul. Part of it is on the European continent, so you're welcome to visit us over here. Great. So we see all these, real estate investment, travel, fostering cats, learning language. So all of these things are providing just very interesting topics for us to continue to explore, to exchange, and to learn more about. So moving on here, this is a yes or no question. Do your personal interests and goals influence what you learn, read, watch, explore, talk about? Yes or no? Do they influence, what you watch on YouTube, for example? Do they influence what you're kind of engaged in and just studying and reading and having discussions about? Of course, yes, very much so, as Rob says. So this is just something to keep in mind. We'll come back to this later, but engaging in in learning and exchanging with our students, and I'm sure that you all do this already, but just to kind of reinforce this and bring this up and apply it to our discussion today, uh, you know, engaging with our students, conversing with them, getting to know them, and having them getting to know each other around our interests and our goals, and trying to craft and design our instruction to meet those interests and those goals are very much a part of differentiating instruction. Thank you all. Thank you for that, for those responses. Okay, so now we're actually going to do a poll. Um, so let me launch this poll here. Okay, so you should see a poll called Describe Your Class. So which of the following, so this is a single choice, which of the following best describes your class? A single level class with proficiency variations with that level. B, a narrow spectrum multi-level class with 2 or 3 levels in a sequence. Or C, a broad spectrum class with 4 or more levels. So this is going to be interesting to kind of see where we're at here. And if you can just answer right on the poll feature, if possible. I'll give you all just a couple more seconds here. About 72% have participated. I see you, Rob. I'm a tutor, so I get all levels. I feel that. Um, okay. So, that could be C, right? Like kind of a broad spectrum experience here. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. I'm going to share results. So we can see here that about 25% of us have a single level class with proficiency variations with that level. So even with single level classes, we have variation, right? We have it might not be so much within the level, although that still might be the case. There might be variation amongst cultures, languages, interests, goals, um, all kinds of different things. And there might be variations depending on the skill, right? Someone might be more advanced, an individual student might be more advanced in listening than speaking, for example, right? Or writing rather than grammar. So there can be variation even in a single level class. Uh, we have about 13% a narrow spectrum multi-level class with 2 or 3 levels in a sequence. And then we have about the majority here. So 63% with a broad spectrum class with 4 or more levels. So perfect. You're in the right place. Everyone is. Okay. All right. I'm going to close this poll here and we'll continue going. Okay, so let's quickly discuss some of the benefits of a multi-level class and really discuss how we can leverage a multi-level class to our students' advantage. And I'm really being explicit here on viewing multi-level classes as an advantage, as beneficial. I think that the knee-jerk reaction of many educators can be, and maybe even some students, that when they see a class with multiple levels, that it can be a disadvantage. So I think I'd really like to kind of shift our mindset, especially within our webinar and hopefully within the classroom, and also work very explicitly in the classroom to shift our students' mindsets to viewing multi-level classes, diverse classes as advantageous. And let's discuss why. So first of all, diverse classes can create an interesting class environment. Variety in the class community can create an interesting and energized atmosphere if we look at multi-level classes as opportunities to do so. So let's talk about how we can do that. So students can practice language at different levels with different skills. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but again, I think the norm is that, especially if you're teaching a class that is multi-skilled, meaning that it's not just a class that you're focusing on speaking or listening or reading, writing, or grammar, but that it's a multi-skill class, which I think the majority of us teach in that kind of environment. Then some students can be more advanced in one skill than another, right? So you can kind of provide those opportunities for students to work on things at their skill level. And also, just as a language learner myself, even if I'm proficient in a certain language, I always appreciate learning and practicing something at a lower level as well as being challenged, right? So that kind of reinforces certain aspects of the language, as well as then can kind of like push me to see what the next level is. Students can provide and receive peer support. So again, in my experience as an ESOL educator, many, if not most, of our students come from more, I'd say, collectivist cultures, and that feel comfortable with supporting peers in the classroom. I would say that's more so the case, especially with the cultures that come from, let's say, the Caribbean or Latin America, Middle East. These kind of places are a little might be a little bit more comfortable with group work with sharing opinions, discussing things. Again, I don't want to overgeneralize, but I think our students can feel comfortable, often more comfortable working collaboratively. So as teachers, it is important that to promote an environment in classroom that fosters this culture of peer support, right? So our adult students often appreciate and are accustomed to taking on a role, especially as adults, where they can help others through their diverse expertise and experiences. And again, this can come from not only just language, expertise with a language, but also expertise of life or a specific topic or skill. So the more that we can learn about our students' interests, strengths, expertise, backgrounds, the more we can draw on those within the classroom. And this is creating a community of teaching and learning. So the more that we can create a community of teaching and learning, the more that we can create a community where everyone is perceived as a teacher and a learner, the teacher included, as a learner, then this creates an environment where it lowers the affective filter, right? The affective filter meaning like that wall that we can put up, or those heightened kind of anxieties that we can have um, when we fear making a mistake, when we fear being judged. So the more that we can create this supportive community, the more relaxed and the more open that students are going to be to take risks. And really that's what language learning and learning in general is all about, right? It's risk taking. It's learning something that you have maybe little to no experience with and trying it out and failing, oftentimes failing miserably, and being able to understand that that is exactly what you need to be doing. And that's called this growth mindset, right? But that takes a community, that takes trust building, and this is where we really need to understand that our peers in the classroom are not there to judge, but are there to support. So important. And lastly, it's having a multi-level class motivates and pushes lower level students. So oftentimes in our classrooms, we only have native speakers as these kind of like role models, right? And that's true within maybe having a teacher as a role model, or even having materials that have these fluent speakers of the language, not making any mistakes, right? Oftentimes not having an accent that's not, a non-standard American accent. And and I think this can be demotivating actually, right? It kind of sets the bar too high, right? And too high, and it's perceived almost too high to reach. And it's not really a realistic like understanding of who a language learner might like sound like. But learning from other English language learners who are more advanced but closer to their level can actually provide a more realistic and attainable goal that students can set for themselves. So having peers as role models, right, is really kind of what a multi-level class can provide. So what is differentiation? So let's kind of clarify that, right? So how can we define differentiation? Well, differentiated instruction is an approach that enables instructors to plan strategically to meet the needs of every learner. It's rooted in the belief that there is variability among any group of learners in their readiness for learning, in their interests, in their learning profiles, for example, and that instructors should adjust instruction accordingly. I think that makes total sense, and I think that as instructors, we aim to do this, right? Whether it be kind of like implicitly or explicitly. I think that we all want to plan strategically. We all want to meet the needs of learners. We all understand and know it's very apparent that there is variability among learners, and we know that we need to adjust instruction accordingly. So how do we do that? Well, we do that in several ways. So before we get to that, let's explain a little bit more why differentiate, right? So to meet learners, in the previous slide, I mentioned variability. So let's discuss in more detail across these categories, specifically around learners' interests and needs, language profiles, and learners' readiness. So the first point here, to meet learners' interests and needs. This has to do mostly with like identities, learner identities, learner goals, and learners' interests in topics. So we're all kind of built to be motivated by what attracts us, and built to kind of be demotivated by what doesn't, right? So it's kind of up to us as teachers to, again, to understand that learners' interests and needs will vary. And the more that we can kind of understand what those interests and needs are, the more that we can at least try to align their needs and their interests with the topics and materials that we're using. And sometimes we have to get a little creative with that if we're using a textbook. But we can also, keep that in mind when we're maybe creating our own materials, our own activities, or kind of guiding students to materials and activities that can meet those interests and those needs. The second point here is leveraging learners' language profiles. So language profiles has to do with students' strengths. I would say their perceived strengths and their perceived weaknesses. Any kind of like gaps maybe in their understanding of language and their use of language. So those are kind of like their profiles. So research shows that we actually build on our strengths. So discovering and building on our students' strengths is a great place to start. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to discover what our students' strengths are. Equally important is encouraging a growth mindset among learners and viewing making errors and being open to feedback as essential aspects of the learning process. I mentioned that before. But this is especially important for students who may have had negative experiences with learning in the past, and particularly negative experiences with language learning. In my experience as an educator, this is the majority of students. So in a lot of ways, it's kind of like, we're having to um, assist and support our students in building confidence and in building new strategies for learning. So, the more that we can understand our learners' profiles, our learners' like experience with language learning, the more that we can address those aspects. And the final one here, number 3, is consider learners' readiness. So this is considering learners' prior academic experience, specifically around like how much academic experience have they had. So we know this, that I know in my adult ESOL classes, there can be a great variety in how much formal education my students have had. So knowing this also can help us to understand how much they're used to certain kind of academic approaches to language, right? Such as note taking, being analytical. This doesn't necessarily just like determine what their abilities are for that more kind of academic approach to language learning, but it can tell a lot with how explicit we need to be in instructing those kind of skills. It's also important just within understanding students' cultures of learning. So cultures of learning are basically, what are students accustomed to in their experience. As an example, a lot of calling on students and asking their opinions on things. Well, this might be something that has really never been done, and they've never really experienced. So if you have a student that is not used to that kind of approach of being asked their opinion, their preference about something, that can be very awkward, right? So having conversations and asking students about their cultures of learning, about what their expectations are of the learning process and of their teachers, can be very helpful to them, because kind of realizing like what that is, and as well as for the teacher to kind of help for teachers to explain what their expectations are of teaching and learning. And it's also just important at the lesson activity level for gathering what students know about a topic, for building background knowledge, or schema as it's known, and being able to support students in understanding whatever the activity is that you're going to be engaged in. Okay, so we are going to watch a video as we are developing our understanding here of differentiating instruction. This is an excellent video. It's called Differentiating Instruction. It's not as hard as you think. So let's just take a moment to watch the video. And what I'd like you to do is after the video, I'd like to ask you to share in the chat what resonated with you about the video, what maybe a key word or a key idea. And I'd also like you to pay special attention to what the video discusses around content, process, and product. So I'll put that in the chat as well. Okay, so let's take a moment here to view this video.
I'm Larry Ferlazzo. Differentiating instruction. To some educators, it conjures visions of having to create a different lesson for every student in the room and long nights of planning and grading. That insanity is not what differentiation is all about. Differentiating instruction is really a way of thinking, not a pre-planned list of strategies. Oftentimes, it is making decisions in the moment based on this mindset. It's recognizing that, to paraphrase Rick Wormley, fair doesn't always mean treating everyone equally. It's recognizing that all of our students bring different gifts and challenges, and that as educators, we need to recognize those differences and use our professional judgment to flexibly respond to them in our teaching. Carol Tomlinson talks about the ability to differentiate in 3 areas: content, process, and product. For content, student choice is one way we might differentiate, like allowing students to choose their research topics or essay prompts. As teachers, we need to keep our eyes on the prize. In other words, we have to keep asking ourselves, what are the main learning objectives? One day, my students were writing an argument essay about what would be the worst natural disaster to experience. John's head was down on the desk. He was not doing anything. I knew that he was interested in football, so I told him that he could write an essay on why his favorite team was the best. He would still have to make an argument just about football instead of hurricanes or earthquakes. His eyes lit up. He got to work and wrote what his mother later told me was the first essay he had ever written in school. He had followed all the guidelines of a good argument essay. The prize, in this case, was learning to write an argument essay, not learning to write about natural disasters. To differentiate by process, teachers can change up how they group students. Sometimes a mixed ability group might work best, while sometimes it might be appropriate to have same ability groups. We might have an English proficient buddy work with an English language learner to help them out. During independent reading time in my early morning class several years ago, one student tended to fall asleep. I told him that if he wanted, he could go to the back and sit on a desk and read. Soon, several others joined him. A few days later, I saw another student dozing off. Before I could say anything, one of his classmates whispered to him, "Just go sit on a desk." Again, it's a matter of keeping our eyes on the prize. What are the learning objectives and what are the best roads to get there for different students? Teachers can also differentiate by the type of product students create. The major demonstration of learning doesn't always have to be an essay or a multiple choice test. One year I had a student who liked to doodle when other students or I were talking. I told her it was okay as long as she was doodling about the information we were discussing. She built on those doodles to create a final project that brilliantly and visually represented all the key points we had covered. When I give tests, I often give students an extra blank page where they can write anything else they remember about the topic being tested that they think is important. I often find the quality of thinking and writing better there than in response to my test questions. None of the differentiating strategies I've mentioned have created any extra work for me. They did require that I had relationships with my students to know their strengths, challenges, and interests. And I needed to demonstrate flexibility in my thinking. Making these strategies successful also required building a strong class culture so that some of the students were being treated differently, and they understood why. And they understood that that was the only way to be truly fair. The ideas mentioned here are just a drop in the bucket. There are a zillion other ways we can support our students' gifts and challenges. We just need to keep our minds and ears open.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed that video. So I wanted to ask you in the chat if you can just share what resonated with you from the video. What's something that kind of sparked some interest, some motivation, some inspiration? And as you're thinking there, I'll share. Let's see. Know your students. Yes, the creativity of his teaching. Absolutely. And it's knowing your students is obviously something that's enjoyable. It's so critical, relevant to understanding their goals, their interests, their needs. Who doesn't want to be creative, right? In teaching, and it didn't demand like any extra effort necessarily, right? It just was this shift in this mindset, different teaching strategies. Yeah, not all students learn in the same way. It's kind of obvious, right? Once we someone says it, but it's also always a good reminder. Um, Rob, you're saying, appreciating giving one student an essay on football. I used to teach the 5 paragraph essay and who the best superhero is since the process is unchanged. Yeah, and so it's providing that flexibility there, right? Of saying, okay, this is the skill that we're working on. The topic can be up to you, right? Um, and yes, Anita, he allows students to use their individuality to learn in a different way, and that's connected to their interests. And when students are interested, when anyone is interested in something, that's why I asked you at the beginning, right? What are you interested in? That just ups our motivation. It stimulates dopamine. It gives us energy, and I know we all have this experience when you're engaged and focusing on something, the time just disappears. Energy level goes up and motivation is built. And this is so, so, so important especially when we're talking about language learning. Because language learning is a long road. And sustaining motivation, sustaining energy, and connecting it to our needs and our goals is really what it's about if it's going to be sustained, right? If it's not, it's so easy just to become demotivated and just stop. So perfect. Thank you all so much for your great comments here. Um, yeah, providing a safe environment, a safe environment where they can express themselves, where their instructor is there to. I would I would think that this instructor is sharing a lot of who they are, as well. And so if we can be a role model of how to share, of how to be open to making mistakes even, um, and open to being curious. I think that's a great example for our students. Okay, so really quickly here, let's do a matching activity just to kind of reinforce what we just learned here. So number one, content. Is content defined as A, B, or C? Go ahead and just put it in the chat. Don't be afraid to make a mistake. I call them beautiful mistakes because that's an opportunity to learn from them. So is content A, B, or C? Christine, thank you. We get a lot of B's here. Okay. So we're thinking content is student choice in selecting topics to motivate. Okay, and how about process? What is process? Is process A, B, or C? All right, we're getting a lot of A's here. Some top students here, and that would leave three. So process diverse ways to support students in learning, and three product student choice and how to demonstrate their learning. So let's just check there. You all are amazing. All the chocolates to you all. We request June and Tammy to send you all virtual chocolates. uh, all right. Well done, everybody. Okay, so this takes us into to needs analysis. So the video discusses the importance of knowing our students. Thank you, Tammy. The video also discusses the importance of knowing our students through building relationships, right? So it's building relationships with them, encouraging them to build relationships with each other, for them to understand and to share their strengths, their preferences, their personalities, their experiences, their needs, and their expectations. So conducting needs analyses throughout our classes is really one of the best ways we can create a classroom culture that encourages and values student reflection and feedback. So the following are some categories that we can ask students about before, okay, a class kind of starts, or I would say at the beginning, maybe is a better way to put it. So, asking questions, a questionnaire, a classroom discussion, um, on students' personal and professional goals, what their perceived strengths and weaknesses are across different maybe skills and topics and things that you're going to be doing right in the classroom. What their level of formal schooling is. What is their experience in maybe informal learning, and also expectations of learning and teaching. So this is where we were talking about previously about cultures of learning. So this is just a very short list here, but just to kind of get our minds stimulated about needs analyses and some topics and categories of what to do before. Feel free in the chat to add any other categories that we can include in a needs analysis at the beginning, of course. And then we also have needs analyses. Oftentimes it's limited to that, right? That a needs analysis is perceived as like something we do just at the beginning and then that's it. But I think that we need to apply needs analyses throughout a course. So this can be weekly, for example. So asking students the level of difficulty of activities, right? Is it too easy? Is it too hard? Um, kind of understanding, engaging what their experiences are with the activities. Learner feedback of class activities. Do they enjoy them? Right? Are they engaging their curiosity? And do the activities align with students' needs? And so this can be more than yes or no, but it can also be to get some feedback from students to kind of understand what their needs and preferences are, because sometimes students, again, they've never been asked these questions. So these kind of you know understandings of what their needs are, what their preferences are, what their goals are, what their expectations are, these might be surfacing throughout a class. So I encourage you to try to do needs analyses more than just at the beginning of the class, but really throughout your course. Okay, and this next, we're going to get into a little bit of scaffolding and challenging. So scaffolding is defined as instructional techniques that help move students progressively towards stronger understanding and greater independence in the learning process. All right. So we also have another understanding of scaffolding, and that's challenging. So where some students might need greater support, some students might need a greater challenge. So I'm going to share with you now. I'm going to switch my screen share here, and we're going to look at this resource called Scaffolding, a Reality of ESOL Instruction, provided by Jamie Adelson Goldstein. And this is actually in the resources on one of the last slides here. I'm going to have a link, but it's on the IPDA website. And it's a webinar that Jamie provided called Differentiating ESOL Instruction. It's not that different. I encourage you to explore that webinar and those resources as well. So let me switch the share here really quickly. And we're going to look here at some examples that Jamie provides of scaffolding. And so we have here the material or task examples to scaffold, right? So those are for maybe lower level students that might need a bit more support, or just students, let's say, that might need some more support. and how to challenge students that might need a little bit more of a challenge. So I'm not going to go through this verbatim, but you can see here that this is a resource that you can utilize. And it says, okay, here's visuals. Here's how you can use visuals, for example, to scaffold or to challenge, right? Here's how you can use a jigsaw reading to scaffold or to challenge. And the list goes on as far as how to utilize problem solving, focused listening, note taking, comprehension questions. So, this is a good kind of resource to say, okay, I have some students that I might need to provide a little bit more scaffolding, a little bit more support. Here are some ideas of how to do that. I have some other students that might need a little bit more of a challenge. Here are some ideas of how to do that. Okay, so again, I provided the link here at the bottom of this webinar PowerPoint, and you can also find Jamie's webinar on the IPDAY website. Okay, let me get back here to our presentation. Okay, and here's another resource that I provide the link to. This is Bloom's Taxonomy, Learning in Action. It's called Bloom's Rose. I'm going to show you this here because this is a really useful handout that I use a lot, actually. I always use this as a reference when I'm formulating objectives to a lesson, to a module, to a syllabus. And we see here that the 1, 2, and 3, it has these lots or lower order thinking skills. And at the bottom here is 4, 5, and 6, and those are HOTS or higher order thinking skills. So this is a great way to scaffold instruction if you want to say, okay, well, first you want to start with like building knowledge, right? So you might want to have students define something or describe or identify something. And then moving up in kind of difficulty or thinking skills, you might want to have them explain something, right? Or illustrate or express. So these are really helpful learning verbs that you can apply again in your planning, and to ensure that you're kind of guiding students to thinking, to establishing some basic kind of understanding and knowledge before kind of maybe jumping right into a discussion, for example, right? Or a survey, or one of these kind of higher order thinking skills. I think this can be used for all students, for all learners, when developing how to kind of scaffold instruction. So I just wanted to share that with you there. Another way to scaffold instruction is through grouping. So we have grouping of, how are we going to group students? Are we going to group them individually, in pairs, in small groups, as a whole class? And how does the grouping uh, affect and support students either through scaffolding instruction or through challenging, right, instruction? Also, the level to consider. Do we want to have the same level within groups, for example, or within pairs, or do we want to have pairs or small groups mixed? Right. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of those? And of course, there are advantages and disadvantages depending on the activity, on the topic, and on your objectives. Interesting goals, right? Do you want to mix interesting goals, or do you want to have students with similar interesting goals kind of work together? That can provide a great deal of motivation if students of the same interests and the same goals are collaborating together and can share resources and support each other. Also consider language and culture background. So some activities you might want to have the same language, right? Especially maybe if you have a really low level student and a higher level student that might be able to kind of translate and interpret some things and provide that first language support. Or you might want to have students that have different languages to kind of really motivate them to engage in English. And this has the same to do with cultural backgrounds. Um, Academic backgrounds, right? Do you want to have students who are working on certain things to have similar academic backgrounds, or to support each other and to provide kind of peer support there? And also their strengths and needs. Maybe you have some students that have similar needs, right? And you might want to have them work on let's say a grammar point, let's say like the past tense. Or you want to have, you say, man, this student really isn't, needs some more support with this. And I have a student here that really has grasped this idea, and see how you can put them together. So a lot of this is through like experimentation, but you can also ask students what they might prefer, right? So this allows student voice, student input in designing the class, and getting there, perhaps even understanding that you might need to provide rationale, right? And be explicit on why you're grouping students. Especially, we're dealing with adults, right? So adults are understanding why you're doing things and why they're doing things in class can really help them to kind of connect the dots, and build that investment, right? That buy-in into group activities. Okay, so we're going to get into applying differentiation now. And this is using one of my favorite resources, StoryCorps animation. So has anyone used StoryCorps? You can just say yes or no in the chat. And some reasons why I like StoryCorps animations is that it has a wide selection of topics and of speakers. It's very interesting, high quality, and authentic examples. It has diverse speakers, topics, and identities. It has visual, oral, and text support. They're mostly adults. Okay. Also, I love all these no's because I'm so excited for you all to have this resource. And students can access, explore, and apply skills and strategies individually on their own. So we have this is a little bit here about StoryCorps. So StoryCorps' mission is to preserve and share humanity's stories in order to build connections between people and create a more just and compassionate world. I mean, what a beautiful mission statement. I think that's kind of our mission, in a lot of ways as teachers of adult ESOL. And as we see here, if we look at the Discover, I say animations, but a lot of them are not only animations. They're actually also audio. So you have some that are audio based, and you have some that are animated. I really like the animated versions because they provide just that visual support. But you can see just from the images the diversity, right? The diversity of speakers, of experiences, of perspectives, and so we're going to look at one, and here we have some of the animated ones. We're going to look at one um, called Lessons from Lourdes. And so when you view it on YouTube, you can actually have a couple more features that might be helpful to our students. So you have this ability to have closed captions. You also have this ability to change the playback speed. So you can slow down the playback speed, okay, which is very helpful. You can have it as normal. You can even speed it up if you want to challenge. Um, and you can, of course, have subtitles. Here it has it for English and Spanish. So I want us to listen and enjoy this animation from StoryCorps. And I want us to kind of start thinking about how we could use this resource for multi-level classes. So here we go.
Everywhere we went, even if we were going to be there for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, picking the crops, my mother would make sure that they enrolled us in school. And Spanish was not allowed in the school systems. Even out in the playground, I mean, they used to have the little playground patrols, which were our friends that were supposed to turn you in if you were speaking Spanish out in the playground, which, of course, I was always in trouble because I was speaking Spanish. Then, of course, in the 9th grade is when you started working for credits to graduate. And we never stayed in one place long enough to get any credits. So why even bother? I thought I knew everything that I needed to know at that time, and got married at 18 and had you. You pretty much grew up in the back of the pickup truck. I was picking crops. And in my breaks, I had to change your diaper and do whatever needed to be done and continue on working. And I always thought that you need to do what I didn't do, which is finish your education first.
You always said that you were going to lead by example. And I remember when you got your GED, you were in the fields. And instead of having lunch, you would have your books and you'd be studying. After that, I remember that you said, I'm going to go to the community college at night. And I remember you taking one class and you started off like that. And then Dad was the one to take care of us, to cook for us. And we hated the beans and eggs because that's all he ever knew how to cook for us. I can remember us stuffing it under the refrigerator, and then we would act like our plates were done. He used to make us eat everything because he wanted us to appreciate everything that we had, because I know that both of y'all came from basically nothing. And I mean, I was just so proud the day that you graduated.
I had to hurry up and graduate before you guys did because I knew you guys were coming right behind me. And
Yeah, well, I really thought that was something special. If I was to have the choice to choose another mother, I would never choose anybody else but you. And when I looked for my partner, I always said, if my wife can be half the woman that my mother is, I will be okay. And I know I've never told you that, but that's the way I feel.
All right. So, what did you all think about that? Do you think that could be a good resource for your classes? Isn't that so beautiful? Yeah. I mean, and this resource is just full of those kind of stories. As we can see from this image here, StoryCorps is actually um, this mobile. They go around this mobile studio here, and they ask people to come into the studio and share their stories. And so, yeah, I invite you to, go ahead and discover StoryCorps. I'll put the link here as well. And another great thing about this is that then students choose um, can choose a story on their own. Either it's to choose the same story. I just put in the chat here lessons from Lourdes from the fields to the classroom. But they can choose their own story. They can choose the same one if they want to reinforce what they learn in class. And again, this is kind of just building learner autonomy, right? So I know we're running low on time here, but I want us to look at some examples of applying differentiation to this, just as an example, to this resource. So, one example here is a pre-listening activity, right? Think, pair, discusses a class to kind of activate and build schema. And that can be things as far as like, what is an experience that really kind of, affected your life, or what is the importance and value of education, right? And so this can be done in pairs, mixed level, for example, different, first languages, different cultures if possible. And then providing some like scaffolding or challenging support here. So for lower levels, maybe true, false, yes or no, that's how they could respond. More advanced can have more kind of open-ended questions, right? Another activity can be kind of comprehension questions. So having comprehension questions, individuals, pairs can do this individually first and in pairs, and ask for volunteers to share. Lower levels can have like a graphic organizer, for example, an outline that is partially filled in. So this can be actually more like a note-taking activity. And more advanced can have a graphic organizer with less or no information provided. For the process, how could we apply differentiating techniques to an active listening activity? Well, for a first listening, it could be main idea. For second listening, can be details utilizing those lower order thinking skills that we saw in Bloom's taxonomy. Maybe a third listening can be more details on the higher order thinking skills, right? Fourth listening can be vocabulary, focusing on high, medium, low frequency words, again, depending on the level of your students. The fifth listening can be maybe grammar point, right? So listen for grammar that was used in this case in StoryCorps. And then maybe a sixth listening can be listen without captions to see how much now they can understand after listening to it 5 times. So this can be how the process can be. We can provide support, for all learners, but applying different techniques of differentiation. And then in the content. So language logs is one way to do this. So assign resources used in class. For example, a resource, students can choose a different or same topic to listen to on their own. They can complete a graphic organizer, for example, a language log outside of class. Bring that language log back to class to share, exchange, practice. And this again develops learner autonomy. Here's an example of a language log that I've done using another amazing resource called This I Believe. But this is for helping students, again, providing a graphic organizer on taking notes, and letting them choose their own topic utilizing a website that provides a lot of support for learners. And so what are different ways students can respond, in their product, right? So what is an important memory or experience that has influenced your life? Is there a family member or friend that has influenced in your life, and how did they influence in your life? So in the product, they can do interviews, and they can do this individually to prepare, do it in pairs to actually engage, share with the class, share online. So lower level students can ask the questions initially, more advanced students can answer the questions initially, and then they can switch. They can do photo collage posters, right? They can do this individually first in preparation in groups, and then share as a class. So lower level students can describe images, maybe read from a script, and more advanced can describe images maybe with no script. And I've actually done this before in my classes, and we can see, here's some links here to audio essays that you can listen to students of mine that have produced. Some slideshows that they have produced on certain topics, and some poster. We see this image here, some poster projects that they have developed individually in groups and then shared as kind of like a gallery walk. So that is all. I know it's rushing there at the end. I could be with you all for another hour at least. But when you access this PDF, all of the links that and a bit more that I discussed is provided in the resource slide. If you would like to get in touch with me, you're always welcome to contact me through LinkedIn. This is my LinkedIn handle. Again, this will be on the presentation slide. And please send me any questions and comments. I'm so sorry we don't have any time to ask and answer them right here, but I am sincerely open to any questions, comments, follow up after this presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to June.
Oh, first off, Dr. Yastampana, thank you so much for facilitating our webinar today. So now we would like to hear back from all of you. There are 3 short questions that are appearing on your screen. If you could just answer those, take a few seconds to answer them, we would really appreciate your feedback. While you do that, I want to remind you that we have our first Tech Tuesday coming up, and it's going to be October 11th on improving the student experience with Microsoft bookings. So I really hope you can join us for that. And then again, on Wednesday, we'll convene again on October 12th for the continuation of our 3rd part of this series on student success strategies. This one will focus on assessing and tracking student learning. So I hope you can join us next Tuesday and Wednesday. We look forward to seeing all of you again. Be safe, and thank you so much. And again, Ramin, thank you so much for providing the time for us today. We really appreciate you and all of you being with us today.
Thank you, June. Thank you, everybody, for your presence here today. Again, all of those resources, they can be found on the PDF that's going to be provided on the IPDAY website for you all to access. Wishing you all the best. Take care.